Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing another episode of our Jurassic World Evolution 2 mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and compare them to their real life fossil counterparts. And today we've got a new pack that's been done by Furlong, who we all know and love them. This is for the pterosaurs, so lots of pterosaur edits. We've split it into two, but there's some extras as well and a couple other cool edits that I've added in here, which I'm quite excited to take a look at. So we're going to be starting off with the pterosaurs today. We're going to be having a look at Ceradactylus. So we've got here a wonderful Ceradactylus. Let's see if you can find one that's in a good, here we are. This one's perfect. So this is our wonderful guy here, Ceradactylus. As you can see, one of the first changes is that we've got is basically got rid of that really weird crest. But Ceradactylus is an ornithochirid, so it's related to animals such as Ornithochirus, Tropicnathus, things like that, but a little bit more based on the tree. It was first described in 1985 by Giuseppe Leonardo and Guazzo Borromeo, which were Italian fossil hunters. It is really only known from its skull, though, and you can see how cool that skull is. So the skull is quite narrow, as you can kind of see here. If we move the head, it is quite narrow, quite long skull. So this guy has a skull that measures about 57 centimeters long, so a little under 2 feet long. And they had a low crest down the end of the snout, as you can kind of see there, which probably matches as well. And they also, as you can see, have these very large teeth near the end of the snout as well. Very, very large. And despite its size, these guys were far from being a predator of like large animals and things like that, even though it's got these big, gnarly-looking teeth. Animals with the kind of adaptations like that, those large teeth that interlock, typically are eating slippery prey. So it's very likely that these guys were fish eaters in their habitats, and most likely have an ecology similar to albatrosses, potentially feeding on ammonites and belemnites and small fish and anything they could pretty much get their mouths around, potentially like small crayfish and crustaceans, things like that. Pretty interesting. And even though this formation was full of other pterosaurs, as we'll get into, these guys potentially would have had niche petitioning, so one would go after potentially another prey, one potentially breed in this area, one will migrate to another area to feed. Compared with seabirds today, there's all sorts of ways that they basically are able to coexist with each other by eating different things, breeding at different times, migrating to different places. It's really, really interesting. And these guys most likely would have potentially either dived or like stayed near the surface and grabbed prey. The kind of skimp eating idea is very much out of style because even the animals that do it today, there's only like one bird that does it, and it's special adaptations for it, which pretty much no pterosaurs have. So it's kind of an old meme. And as I mentioned, there's other animals that lived in its habitat, other pterosaurs, because the Santana Formation where it's from is full of all sorts of different pterosaurs. And they would have had different mouths feeding on different things, like Tapajara that we'll get into had a very round body and round snout, and we used it to feed on pretty much potentially omnivore, herbivore. These guys are very much fish eaters, things like that. And its name translates to atrocious finger from Sierra, so it's Ceradactylus, that's what the name means. And its size is estimated to be about 5 meters wingspan, or about 18 feet wingspan, which is pretty cool. Really, really big fan of these guys. Again, was mentioned in Jurassic Park novel, and I believe that's why it was added, but you can see some of the changes here, especially to that skull. That body's made much more thicker. They've got the large flight muscles, and you can see that wonderful wing feather that they've got going on here. Probably a little bit more rounded there. I would probably say in terms of the wing, maybe a little bit more rounded, kind of like there, but overall looks really, really nice. Much more rounded wing. Obviously, it needs picnofibers because most have picnofibers. When we get to Quetzalcoatlus, I'll talk more about that because it actually has picnofibers, but really, really awesome. So let Ceradactylus go on and do its thing. Next up, we have got Maradactylus, which comes from the same formation, actually. Let's see. Here we are. Flying out doing his thing. So this is Maradactylus. So this guy's also known from Brazil. The same formation. And seems to be known from also a single incomplete skull. So it's really only known from those lower Cretaceous rocks as well. It was described in 2014. And it's actually just part of the growing list of pterosaurs that come from that place. And you can see it's also got a very long snout, and it tapers down a little bit. It's roughly about 75 centimeters or 2.5 feet long, a little bit bigger than Ceradactylus. And the tip, as you can kind of see here, bears a kind of semicircular crest, which is common in a lot of the later ornithochirids. Some of the earlier ones, like Ceradactylus, didn't really have that quite big yet, but later ones like Maradactylus and Dreadnoughtus kind of had that bigger crest. And while the lower jaw was not recovered, it's very likely that it was matched by a crest on the lower jaw as well. So upper and lower jaw had kind of a round crest. And the jaw, as you can see, also contains a large number of tooth sockets, which implies a large amounts of teeth. And though on the specimen they were mostly either eroded or missing, though with many large teeth, and they're obviously similar to Ceradactylus, kind of concentrated to the edge of the snout. So these guys would have been potentially feeding on fish as well, maybe a bit more of an adaptation to slippery fish, things like that. Most likely eating different things to not clash with each other, although they could have lived at different times. And although it's really only known from a skull, comparisons to very similar relatives gives this guy a wingspan about 4.5 meters, or about 15 feet. A little bit smaller than Ceradactylus, but still cool regardless. These guys have been often compared to most closely relative animals and also contemporary taxa, because it's an ananguarid ornithochirid, so related to Tropicnathus and Apanguara. And there are several of these guys found in that formation. And the ornithochirids are more closely related to the isodactylids and nyctosaurids and pterodontids, which is pretty interesting. They all grew with ornithochirids. And pretty much all known ornithochirids, similarly to Ceradactylus and things like that, they were all kind of ocean-going, very much similar ecology to today's albatrosses and those kind of seabirds going off to their thing. They had long wings that allowed them to soar on ocean currents, similar to albatrosses. And they had short necks and long, narrow wings that allowed them to do that. And these narrow teeth would have been likely helped to grab fish and slippery prey, such as, like as I mentioned, squid before. Similar sort of food, but yeah, it looks really, really nice. You can see that change of the skull there. See the changes to the neck and body. Really given a much more bulky because they had big muscles that allowed them to fly. And changes to the wing there. I like this a little bit more. Maybe try and extend a little bit more down to the leg and put it there, but other than that it's fine. A little bit more rounded as well. Little changes like that really do add a lot, and I think it's quite awesome. And also picnic fibers, of course, but we won't get into that quite yet. Let them fly off and do their thing. So all these pterosaurs, as I'm going to mention, were done by Furlong. So next up we have got something a little different. We've got Tapajara, which is a really, really cool one. So let's have a look below. Well, we won't look at you because you're flying off doing your thing, but here we've got the original. Look at this wonderful guy here. This is the original, the OG Tapajarids. So this is Tapajara welsonfoldi. This is what this one is based on. These guys are a genus that are also found in Santana Formation, and at the same time as a few other pterosaurs like Ceradactylus and Tropicnathus. And all these kind of animals could coexist because of the different dietary needs and things like that. And their cousins were like picking fish from the water surface, but these guys were most likely either omnivores or herbivores. You can see by that larger snout, as you can kind of see there. Big, bulky snout, potentially eating fruits and even scavenging, things like that. Really, really interesting. And this guy's a little bit confusing because the original Jurassic World Evolution 2 Tapajara is actually based on a close relative, Dupandactylus. There was originally all kind of considered the same genus, and there is 3 kind of species within that. So there's Dupandactylus imperator, Dupandactylus navigans, and Tapajara welsonfoldi. And they've kind of all swapped and changed. They were sometimes lumped into the same. So basically, Tapajara is sometimes considered Dactylus and vice versa. But as it stands of today, the most recent interpretation is that Tapajara is only known by Wellfoldi, and Wellfoldi is kind of known for being a little bit smaller. These guys have a wingspan about 1.5 meters, or about 5 feet or so, and have this much more rounded crest. And Dactylus Imperator is the one with the big, impressive sail-like crest, which was based on the original Jurassic World Evolution 2 one. And Navigans is a little bit different. I think I've covered mods of Navigans. It's almost got like a crest that goes forward, so it almost goes like this around it, which is quite interesting. And though they're closely related, they could have had a very similar ecology, as I mentioned, being omnivores or potentially herbivores or something like that. So that's really, really interesting. It'd be cool to do some isotopic studies or something to see what it was really eating. But there's two interpretations of this that Furlong has done. I think this is a good idea to look at the crest here on the here like that, maybe. But this is the round crest, which is based off Wellsfoldi, which is the only true now Tapijara species. And the Nacho chest is crest, is based off Dactylus Imperator, which is really, really more, you could say is more impressive, but this is more accurate to Tapijara itself. So Furlong did that so you can both, anyone who downloaded the mod, you can choose. You can have your more impressive Dactylus or your more accurate Tapijara. So it's really your choice, but yeah, really, really cool. I really like the changes of this guy. Much more rounded wings, things like that. I think the wing membrane could come down here as well, as it's the same with the other models, and also pectofibers, things like that. But really, really awesome. I'm definitely a big fan of this guy. I really do love him. Awesome. So we're going to let them fly off and do their thing, and then we're going to have a look at our last one. We're going to save Quitz for last, since he's the thumbnail animal, but we've got Dsungaripterus, which is a really, really cool pterosaur. So let's open up. So this one's slightly different. Let's see if we can get one. We'll have a look at you there with your mouth open. Makes you look more interesting and intimidating. So, Dsungaripterus is one not from the Santana Formation, finally. This one comes from China, from the Lermigavon Formation, and is in its own family group, Dsungaripteridae, which is pretty interesting. Often considered one of the ugliest pterosaurs, which I think is very unfair. But it has this big head and upward curving jaws, which is very interesting to its ecology, and we'll get into this. These guys were a medium-sized animal. The size of its wingspan is about 3 meters or so, and comes from the early Cretaceous of the Chinese Juggernaut Formation, so it lived around the same time, early Cretaceous, a lot of these other pterosaurs, but in China instead of South America. So the only known species of its genus, Dsungaripterus welli, was named by C.C. Young in 1974. 64, and from a well-preserved skull and partial skeleton, but there have been more remains found since, so we have a pretty good idea of what Dsungaripterus looks like. 3.5 wingspan, or about 3 meters or so, with medium size for that Cretaceous kind of pterosaur standard, early Cretaceous pterosaur standard, and it had this crest on this head, which was most likely had colorful skin extensions, you can see, supported by bone. So instead of being a hard crest like Pteranodon, these guys would have had a little bit more of a fleshy crest, which is quite interesting. And it's the original member of its family, the Dsungaripteridae, which is basically a really weird group with these upturned beaks or snouts, and these strong crushing teeth at the back of the mouth, as we'll get into. So that's pretty interesting. These guys are cousins of our starkids and would have been similar in a lot of ways. They would have had more of a similar ecology. So while things like Quetzalcoatlus and Hexagopteryx were most likely giant terrestrial storks in that kind of ecology, more similar, these guys would be more like plovers potentially, which is really interesting. These guys were certainly quite well adept walkers, so they potentially walked across like muddy riverbanks or potentially coasts and things like that, and would use their large jaws and upturned beak to basically pry into the sand and the rocks and take bites out of mussels and snails and other hard-shelled organisms. So that's what we would call durophagus, so they're eating like hard things. And which is quite interesting. So they would have been, for a passive hunter, mainly just kind of walking around, eating small things that they can get their mouths around. Nothing too big because it's got to fit in their jaws and torso. But they would be basically using their upturned beaks to pry into rocks and mud and things and just kind of grab stuff like that, which is quite interesting. And I think that's really, really cool. Really shows that even though pterosaurs are quite different from birds, a lot of them, especially during like the early Cretaceous, right before the birds kind of took off in the later Cretaceous, they had very similar niches in a lot of ways to birds, and shows there's a lot of convergent evolution. But we can see these wonderful crests got going on here. The rounded wing there, also the membrane should probably, as I mentioned, still come down there. Could use a little bit of that, but I think it's kind of more to stay in the Jurassic Park style. But still cool regardless, definitely a big fan. Really, really cool. So we're going to keep Quetz here, we're going to keep him for last. Let's see, yeah, Quetz is going to be for last. But we're going to be moving on to some other animals. So these were all done by Furlong, and now we're moving on to some of the extras from the extras pack. So we've got, next up, we have got Listrosaurus. So a really, really cute little animal. So let's have a look at these cute little guys. Look at these cute little goobers. Let's have a look at our one here, because he is cute. So this is the one from Dominion, because I think he's cute. I want to look at this guy. So Listrosaurus, which means shovel lizard. These guys are a type of Dinosaurs from the late Permian or early Jurassic, which is quite interesting. We'll get into the history. They lived in a lot of areas, especially like Antarctica, India, China, Mongolia, Russia, and South Africa. So quite a wide-ranging species, with quite a few species in there as well, or quite a wide-ranging genus with a few dozen species. Though there's mostly recognized 6, but depends who you ask, really. And they range in size quite a bit. The smaller species were about the size of a small dog, but the largest one's got about 8 feet long or so, or about 2.5 meters. So Listrosaurus has this kind of really horny beak there, and they've got these large tusks that would be used for digging and potentially like biting off pieces of vegetation. Quite heavy built with these sprawling limbs and quite big forearms as well, potentially for digging. And they would have been able to dig burrows and things like that. And the reason they were able to get across the world, because like, how did the animal can get from Antarctica to Russia? At the time, the early Permian to Jurassic, the world was in a giant supercontinent that was called Pangaea, and that allowed animals to pretty much move all across the world. An animal could theoretically walk from Antarctica to China and back, which is quite interesting to think about, and walk there. But most of the fossils that we found are kind of from the southern hemisphere, with a few in the northern hemisphere as well. But as I mentioned, there's also quite a few species that have been lumped and split over time. But this particular species that Furlong based this one on is Listrosaurus gregori, I believe you say that. So these guys were found in the earliest Jurassic sediments and Permian sediments of the Moscow Basin. And they were actually regarded one of the least specialized species of Listrosaurus. So these guys were pretty much primed to survive the Great Dying. So if you guys don't know what the Great Dying is, at the end of the Permian, which was the time before the dinosaurs, the Jurassic was basically the beginning of the Mesozoic. That the Permian, there was basically the greatest extinction that the world has ever seen. About 90% of all life in the oceans and even on land as well, like up to 70%, I believe, went extinct. It's the biggest extinction that happened. And most likely what happened was a lot of volcanic activity that happened around Russia at the time. And it took over a few million years, but it basically just choked the world. It got really hot. It basically released a lot of gas into the atmosphere and more acidic rain and cooler everything, and just was not good for the life. But luckily, there were some animals that survived, including Listrosaurus, and it was believed to be able to survive because of being able to go potentially into torpor or hibernate through these harder times. even potentially being talked about like just luck, but being least specialized and potentially a lot smaller than a lot of animals it lived with, especially helped get through this extinction. So basically, anything that was small enough and well adapted to survive. The biggest and baddest things, the Gorgonopsids, the Parasaurs, those big bad things like Scutosaurus and Ichthyovenator, not Ichthyovenator, Extrovenator, I believe you say that, and the big Gorgonopsid from Russia. They basically all just went extinct because, similar to the Mesozoic, all the big things that needed a lot of food died out, and the meek kind of inherited the earth, of course. And you don't get much more meek than Listrosaurus, but these guys were so cute. But what happened after the extinction? These guys just blew up. So right after the extinction in the early Jurassic, basically there's no other places where you can find rocks that have been dominated, fossil rocks that have been dominated by this species. So ecosystems would have been like 95% Listrosaurus. So basically, if you went around like the earliest Jurassic, pretty much your most likely animal to encounter is Listrosaurus and pretty much nothing else, since these guys just recovered so quickly. And they managed to re-radiate and do their thing for a few million years. But sadly, as kind of everything else caught up, they went extinct around the early to mid-Jurassic. So that's kind of when they went extinct. But they had a good run. They were very successful animals. Pretty much the most dominant species in an ecosystem pretty much ever. So that's really, really interesting. But yeah, really, really cute guys. And you can see they've got their hairs here. And they're also synapsid, which is a therapsid type of synapsid, pretty much. So they would have had one hole in their skull. It would have been related to things like Dimetrodon and things like that. And more closely related to us than like dinosaurs. So technically we have a close relative of ours in the game, other than obviously the goats and the people in the game already. But we can see the hair there. It's really nice to see that shader getting put to use. And I'm going to say he's really, really cute. And I do love these guys. They're really, really awesome. Such a big fan of these little dudes. So yeah, let's let them run off. Really nice to be able to cover some of those feathered and mod species as well. It's really, really awesome. So let them run off and do their thing. And then we'll have a look at the next one. So every mod up to this point has been done by Furlong. But now we're going to have a look at... Let's see if we should be able to release. We have got Dreadnoughtus by Pickle. Another paleo-edit. You can see that size difference between the biggest animal and the smallest animal in the game. Isn't that so wild? We can see here our giant Dreadnoughtus that fears nothing. Really, really awesome animal. So we can have a look at some of the first changes, because let's be honest, this guy really did need a makeover. We can see some changes to the head here. So we don't really have the skull of Dreadnoughtus, even though it was one of the most complete Titanosaurs found. It's very likely that it had a skull quite similar to something like other Titanosaur skulls that were known. We can see it hasn't got that weird look to it there. It's got these long snout to help grazing and things like that, or browsing. These guys were most likely tall browsers, things like that. And then you have these quite extensive lips with potentially some keratin. Could have been like a pseudo beak. It's been found in animals like Camarasaurus. Very, very interesting. But a lot of people do put the nostrils of titanosaurs and other sauropods at the top here. Should be at the front of the snouts. It's very similar condition to like monitor lizards. They probably have these big chambers there, which probably help to cool down air or help cool their brains, and a few other adaptations that could be useful. But yeah, really, really awesome. See that neck's also been extended a little bit, or expanded, big and thick. Titanosaurs do have those big necks, and they have large ligaments to be able to hold that up high, very similar to like brachiosaurs and things like that. And we can see some of the changes here. Really love seeing the new feet here. Was one thing that pretty much all the animals got wrong. You can even see the changes to the footprints here. So they didn't have those elephant-like feet. Titanosaurs and most sauropods had these kind of fleshy hoof shape to their feet there, especially with these kind of little spur things going on. with the nail there. In these quite tall columnar but very thin legs, you could say. But with even Titanosaurs, some of the later Titanosaurs completely lost their toes, so they were pretty much walking around on their knuckles all the time. So that's a really interesting adaptation for these guys, potentially help with weight bearing. And I really do like the idea that the spur could have been something that like independently evolved, with something like spurs on like a peacock or a pheasant. I think that'd be really, really cool, like Spec Evo thing. But most likely that wouldn't have been a toe, considering those type of titanosaurs completely like lost a lot of their toes. We see some changes to the body there, much more a little bit more rounded. You can see the changes to the legs and feet there, a lot more thick, wider thighs there, and the change to the back legs. They had only the three claws that turned that way that have been used for digging and things like that. And then you can see back here, we can look at the tail there. A little bit more of extended tail, and then it extends all the way back. A lot of the dinosaurs in Jurassic World and Jurassic Park have two shorter tails. But yeah, really, really awesome. Nice to see a nice paleo-edit. One thing I'd like to put out there, though, I'd really like to see a Barosaurus based on, or a really long dinosaur like Barosaurus, Seismosaurus, just a long diplodocus or something based on the 2022 Dreadnoughtus. I think that'd be rather awesome, because I really want a big long dinosaur like that to showcase. So if you guys are watching this and you can make mods, I know free for all, do what you want. If you guys want to do that, go ahead. But I'm not sure everyone's turned like a cosmetic into a new species, but I think that'd be really cool to see. I'd really love to see a Dreadnought, a Barosaurus or a Seismosaurus based off a 2022 Dreadnoughtus. But yeah, really nice to see that. More accurate than the 2022 one now, with this really nice paleo-edit, but we'll let him walk off. Look how big and beautiful this guy is. Really, really do love this guy. So now we're going to move on to another paleo-edit by Pickle. So we've got his Dilophosaurus. So here we are, look at this beautiful guy. So we have finally got here, let's see if we can get a slightly better, there we are, that's a little bit nicer. But we have got here a Dilophosaurus. So, for those of you who don't know, there is a lot wrong with the Jurassic Park Dilophosaurus, but in 2020 we got a much better description of Dilophosaurus, especially those remains, and we've learned a lot about how different it actually is. But we can see some of these changes here, even though it's way too small. I believe there's one, that's the 2022 one that I really like the colors of on this guy. But anyway, this is a lot of the changes here. We can see to the face here. It's got a much more robust skull, and it's got a huge notch in there. You can't really see it because of the lips, which are actually awesome to add, by the way. It's got a large notch with these large teeth that potentially would help catch smaller prey. And these larger crests would have been potentially quite covered in keratin, or potentially even like hollow, so it would have been like a carapace, potentially something like a cassowary is a common analog for it. And you can see that kind of interpretation here with all the jagged edges and things like that, which I think really gives it a unique look. But we can see to the face here, look at those big teeth that are very much like what we have for Dilophosaurus. And also more robust jaws, which is a lot more robust than we thought. You'll see that long neck there. It's got a very kind of a long neck there, a very long body. Also those large arms, and potentially with a fourth finger that we don't really get to see here though. Long body there with the large pubis in there, and a long tail as you kind of see here. So this is much more fits the more recent 2020 interpretation of Dilophosaurus. Though, one thing though, we'll have a look at the body size. It still hasn't changed its size. As you can see, it's still way too small. Dilophosaurus in real life would have actually been about 7 meters long or so, 6 or 7 meters, so much, much bigger, potentially bigger than even the Jurassic Park Velociraptors, so quite huge. And the reason that was is basically they want to have the big raptors, so they shrunk down the Dilophosaurus to basically not confuse people too much. And another couple of things was added was venom, which is obviously not true. We don't have any real much evidence of any non-avian dinosaurs that were poisonous or had venom, though it's definitely not out of the question. There's no physical evidence for it yet. We do have poisonous birds, though, so that could be an interesting adaptation that some dinosaurs could have had to protect themselves. Some poisonous birds. But one thing as well is that we can see here that it's been removed, but the giant sails or crests that they had that come out when they're about to spit, those are based off a frilled dragon from Australia, and there's no evidence that dinosaurs had that. And even if you did try to find it, there was no evidence of that. You'd have a hyoid bone, because that's where it's connected to on the frilled dragon. Most likely you would have seen evidence of the musculature, but we don't really see that in any dinosaurs. So a crest like that is very unlikely, but still cool. I believe I like people being a little bit more extravagant and stuff and thinking about things more when reconstructing dinosaurs, because if you look at some weird animal structures today, there is some cool animal structures, but just look at the bones and see what goes with, you know? I'm like in the middle of the road. I don't like the overly speculative too much, but sometimes it's okay as long as it's based in evidence and things like that. Like something like the poisonous birds. That's not something you can directly prove that a dinosaur was poisonous, but it is in birds today, and we probably wouldn't know that that specific species was poisonous if we didn't have the fossil record. So go ahead, why not? But if it's anything that really should have showed up in the bones, I'd say nah. But that's just a little tirade of mine. I'm not going to worry too much. But yeah, really, really cool. Let's let these guys walk off, do their thing. Let's just have a look at that 2022 Dilophosaurus. You can see the wonderful scaling there and the beautiful crest. So that's really, really awesome. It's come out rather beautifully. So let them walk off and do their thing. So next up, we're second to last. Also, this one was done by Furlong as well. We have got the Allosaurus fragilis. Oh, I think we forgot, but let's have a look at this anyway. We'll just have a look at this one. So this is Allosaurus fragilis, one of the species of Allosaurus that's been described. There's believed about 6 or so. Also, it depends if you include Saurophaganax, things like that. It's kind of a little bit complicated in the taxonomy, but this is what it's based on according to Furlong. One of the major differences is you can kind of see in that skull there, but really, really cool. It's based on the Battle of Big Al slash, not Battle of Big Al, Battle of Big Rock. And the 2022, obviously, Dominion Allosaurus, and it's based on that skin, but I think it looks so much nicer with a more accurate body. And you can kind of see there the head changes to the head. You can see there's more extended crest, there's bulkier head, a lot more taller skull. These Allosaurids did have taller skulls, and not quite big and mean like Tyrannosaurids, but more similar to like Ceradactylus, able to like share flesh and things like that. And very much adapted potentially like puncture and rake with its teeth and things like that compared to some other theropods, which is quite cool. They've got a very distinctive skull there with these large crests, which would have been covered in keratin potentially for social displays and things like that. Also, this quite S-shaped neck he's got going on here, and these large arms. Allosaurus did have some pretty big arms for a theropod, which is pretty cool. Or for a large theropod, that is. But you can see these large claws here, potentially used for grappling prey and things like that, or just given a good scratch. Very, very large back legs here for running around, things like that. And this longer tail, so you can see the changes there. It just better fits the anatomy of realistic Allosaurus, or Allosaurus fragilis. You can see the change of legs there as well. Just better fits that anatomy, and I think it looks rather nice. Just all these little changes that help better fit it. And we can have a look at the feet there. The feet look pretty spot on with the keratin there. One thing as well is I really like the addition is the osteoderms. So I know a lot of people are really anti-osteoderms on dinosaurs because they're very crocodilian thing. But it's obviously very likely possible. There are dinosaurs with osteoderms, especially like Ankylosaurs and things like that. But one thing that is often forgotten about osteoderms is that they also do not just have a defensive function, but they also, especially in crocodiles today, they have a thermoregulatory function. So that means they're able to regulate their body temperature because the osteoderms in there are hollow and they are filled with blood vessels, so they can potentially use it to get rid of heat out of their body. So if they get too hot, they can just release it out through the blood vessels in the osteoderm. So they do have some regulatory, thermoregulatory kind of functions to them. So it's very possible that larger dinosaurs could have had osteoderms that haven't preserved yet or something like that. Much, not quite for protection, but potentially just to help better regulate their body temperature. So I think that's something that's quite interesting, and who knows, we might find evidence of that someday in some larger dinosaurs, because being a big animal, because of the square cube law, you have a large volume. That means it's very much easier for you to keep heat inside you or keep heat on your body. So it'd be a great way to, especially for reptiles, to help cool off. So a very, very interesting idea, and I hope we see more science to back that up in some dinosaurs. But I think the osteoderm look just also looks quite cool. So if you like something that's like Jurassic Park-esque or Jurassic World-esque, but has more accurate anatomy to realistic dinosaurs, then this Allosaurus is kind of perfect for you. So yeah, really, really cool. So definitely a big fan of that. So last but certainly not least, we're going back to our last animal. We have got here Quetzalcoatlus. So here we are. Let's see if we can get one of him in the sun. There we are. Perfect. So this is our Quetzalcoatlus. So our big one from Dominion. So really, really awesome. So Quetzalcoatlus is an astacid from North America. Is often described as the largest pterosaur ever to exist and the largest flying creature ever to exist as well. And despite its massive size and it existed with T-Rex, we don't really know too much about it. It was only recently described, actually, believe it or not. But there is a few species of Quetzalcoatlus. There's Quetzspa from the Hell Creek Formation. That's a lot smaller but more complete. But the original was first described from an arm bone or a humerus found in 1971 in the Texas and the animal lived between 68 and 66 million years ago, which basically is right at the end of the time of dinosaurs that a lot of dinosaurs, including T-Rex, went extinct at. So there's a few other species in this one. The large species of Quetzalcoatlus that everyone knows and loves is Quetzalcoatlus northropi, and is a really big animal as we love. And the smaller one is either Quetzspa or Quetzalcoatlus. I believe it's also been named to Quetzalcoatlus because Quetzalcoatlus got recently described as well, like a full description. And it was named after Douglas Lawson, which discovered Lawson, who discovered Quetzalcoatlus. So that's basically Quetz Lawsoni and Quetz northropi, and also Quetzspa. I believe that's still a thing. The genus name comes from the Mesoamerican serpent god Quetzalcoatl, which actually probably looked kind of similar to Quetzalcoatlus, especially considering that his feathers. And the species name from Northropi was honored by John Kirsten Northrop, which is the founder of the Northrop tailless flying winged aircraft. So the very interesting thing. And the smaller one is actually thought to be a separate species classified as Spa, but was originally named, I believe, as Lawsoni because of Douglas Lawson, which is pretty cool. Quetzspa is much more complete than the massive Northropi, so a lot of that is based on that. Quetzspa, or Lawsoni, is about 5.5 meters in wingspan, but of course this much larger Northropi has been estimated up to like 20 meters or so, but the most recent estimates is about 10 to 12 meter wingspan, as you kind of see here, which really shows its size and quite interesting. So, in terms of its ecology, Quetzalcoatlus would have most likely, let's see if we can get it proper, there we are, would have most likely been like other astacids, like a giant terrestrial stork or a vulture. So it would have been flying around, gliding on thermals and things like that, looking and scavenging for prey. And sometimes relatives like Dsungaripterus could potentially eat animals up to 70 kilos. So that's pretty much a small person. But these guys would have been flying and soaring. These guys seem to have a preference for inland habitats across America. But there's no reason they couldn't fly around the world if they truly wanted to. But the most recent evidence or estimates of their size is about 10 to 12 meters, and the weights have estimated to be less than like 70 kilograms. but the most recent estimates is pretty much put their weight at 250 kilograms, so about a quarter ton. So a big animal that can fly, very, very interesting. And the animal would have stood erect and basically would have been as tall as a giraffe, as standing up, so would have been about 5 meters tall, so look a giraffe in the eye, and the tallest carnivore on its continent, and actually towered over Tyrannosaurus, so it was very, very much smaller and compared to the 6 to 9 ton weight of a Tyrannosaurus and the 250 kilogram weight or quarter ton weight of Quetzalcoatlus. They also lived with an animal, Allosaurus, which is already in the game, and would have towered even over this giant pterosaur, and would have been about 3 times taller, about 15 or so meters tall, and about 100 tons, in 80 to 100 tons in weight. But it seems that these guys were also quite interesting. A little bit about their ecology. Thanks to finds in Argentina, we know that sauropods also flooded the environment with precious offspring, and these baby sauropods, but also carrion, smaller animals, potentially smaller dinosaurs. Pretty much these guys would have been a seafood diet. They would pretty much be eating anything they get their mouths around. Baby dinosaurs, small dinosaurs themselves, large reptiles, potentially small crocodiles, things like that. They would have been very much generous, potentially, and also feeding carrion, things like that. But these guys are very, very interesting. I do love Quetzalcoatlus. And we can see that it's got the only one in the game at the moment, other than the Dimorphodon skin, with pectinofibers. So pectinofibers are very similar to feathers in a lot of ways, which is quite interesting. So there's a little bit of talk about how pectinofibers and feathers evolved. Because it's quite similar, if you compare the pectinofibers of some pterosaurs, like relatives of Tapajara, things like that, and then compare them to modern bird feathers, they get up to about stage 3. So they basically have a stalk and lots of like little bits coming off. Not quite the pennaceous feathers that you see in bird wings, but similar. So the question is how did that arise? Did potentially Ornithodira, the group of both pterosaurs, the ancestors of both pterosaurs and dinosaurs, did they have feathers? Or did groups such as pterosaurs, some theropods, and ornithischians such as Calindrodromius and Psittacosaurus evolve feathers independently, or did their ancestors have it? And then dinosaurs such as like sauropods and thyreophorans, which are ankylosaurs and stegosaurs, lost that independently. So very interesting discussions about evolution. Potentially feathers could be basal to all dinosaurs, or could have evolved multiple times. Either way, it's kind of a chicken or the egg, which came first, or which got lost, which was first and which got lost. But really, really interesting to talk about that way in Dino evolution. But we can see these lovely changes here. We can see it's got the proper wings there. See, much more rounded like that. That's what all the dinosaurs or all the pterosaurs and the game wings should look like. Looks really, really nice. You can see there's thinning of the skull. They've got a very long skull there. And I really like this crest as well. You can see there's pectinofibers going along the body. I would say the pectinofibers should probably go along the wings a bit more, but still really, really awesome. And this is probably the most accurate one that we have in the game. Really, really big fan, and how can you not love a big pterosaur? So let's let this guy walk off and do his thing, or fly off. So really, really beautiful. I think Furlong did a really great job with this Quetz, and everything else is done. And Pickle as well, with the Dilo and the Dreadnoughtus. Really, really awesome. So, yeah, I think this would be a great place to end the video. So, I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.